Who sent you here? What are you doing here?
What, I was just sleeping?
This is private property!
I've nowhere to live. I need formula for my baby.
Just shut up. Don't create this drama. Why is he crying?
He has a fever. I need medicine.
The groundskeeper found her first. He was walking the east fence of the Garner estate around 6 in the evening when he spotted the shape on the back lawn. A young woman curled on her side in the grass, a faded yellow blanket spread beneath her, and a baby tucked against her chest. Both of them were asleep. Neither had any business being within 2 miles of this property. He called Warren. Warren Garner was 38 years old and had inherited the family estate at 26 when his father died of a heart attack during a zoning board meeting he had personally rigged. The Garners owned 1,100 acres in Habersham County, Georgia. They owned the lumber mill, the private road to the lake, 3 county commissioners, and half the mortgages in town. Warren ran it all the way his father had, quietly, completely, and without tolerance for surprises. He drove up in his truck and walked across the lawn and stood over her. She was young. Dirty clothes, mud on her sneakers, hair matted against her cheek. The baby was small, 3 months, maybe 4. The yellow blanket beneath them was threadbare and faded, the kind of thing you'd find at the bottom of a donation bin. He nudged her foot with the toe of his boot. She woke fast, the way people wake when they've trained themselves to sleep light. Her arms tightened around the baby before she even sat up. She scrambled backward on the blanket, pulling the child into her chest, and looked up at him with the kind of fear that comes from experience. "Who sent you?" Warren said. "Nobody sent me. I thought it was empty. The gate was open and the grass was high and I just needed somewhere to." The gate was not open. She went quiet. He watched her eyes. She was trying to decide whether to lie or tell the truth, and she wasn't good enough at either to hide the process. "I climbed the fence," she said. "Near the back. There was a low spot." He looked at her for a long time. She was maybe 21. Thin in a way that suggested weeks of not eating enough. "What's your name?" he said. Not a question. A command. "Jolie. Jolie Weaver. And the baby? Beau. His name is Beau." Warren put his hands in his pockets and tilted his head slightly, the way he did when he was calculating. She didn't know that yet. She would learn it. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to come inside. You're going to tell me exactly how you found this place and who you've talked to. And then I'm going to decide what to do with you." She gathered the yellow blanket with one hand, folding it over the baby like a shield, and followed him toward the house. She understood instinctively, this was not a man you said no to. The inside of the house was cold. Not temperature cold, personality cold. Sparse furniture, dark wood, no photographs anywhere. A kitchen that looked like it had never been used for anything more than coffee and bourbon. Warren pointed at a chair and Jolie sat down with Beau still pressed against her chest. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. "Start talking." She told him everything because she didn't know how to do anything else. Aged out of foster care at 18. Had Beau 10 months later. The father was a boy named Chris who left town the week she told him. The shelter in Clarksville had kicked her out for missing curfew twice. She'd been walking for 2 days. She saw the stone fence through the trees and thought the property was abandoned. She was just looking for somewhere flat and dry to sleep. Warren listened without expression. When she finished, he stayed quiet for almost a full minute. She could hear a clock ticking somewhere deeper in the house. "You can't leave," he said. "What do you mean I can't leave? This property doesn't exist on paper. Nobody knows about it. Now you do. So until I figure out what to do with that, you stay here. You can't just keep me here. I have a baby, I need formula, I need diapers." He pulled a pen from a drawer and slid a notepad across the table. "Write down what you need." She stared at him. There was no warmth in it. He was containing a problem. She was the problem. She picked up the pen, hand shaking, and started writing. Warren left the room without another word. The first week was silence. He gave her a room on the 2nd floor. The supplies appeared in the kitchen the next morning. Formula, diapers, plain white onesies. No note. She kept to her room with Beau. She heard Warren come and go at odd hours, his voice always low on the phone, fragments drifting through the walls. Land deals. Names she didn't recognize. Numbers that sounded like money. She made coffee every morning because she was up with Beau anyway and left a cup on the counter before retreating upstairs. On the 4th day, the mug she'd left was rinsed and sitting upside down. That was their first communication that felt like something other than captivity. By the 2nd week, a rhythm had formed. Coffee appeared. Coffee disappeared. She stayed out of his way. He stayed out of hers. At night she walked Beau in the upstairs hallway, humming the same tuneless half-melody she'd made up in the shelter. She didn't know Warren could hear it through the floor. He could. One afternoon she tried to cook something. Found a pan, some butter, eggs near their expiration. She turned the burner too high and the butter went black in 30 seconds and the smoke alarm screamed through the house. Beau started wailing. She was fanning the pan with a dish towel when Warren appeared in the doorway. He looked at the smoking pan. He looked at her. He looked at the dish towel she was waving like a surrender flag. Were you trying to feed the baby or signal a helicopter? She opened her mouth but nothing came out. Her face was red. Smoke was curling toward the ceiling. Warren walked past her, turned off the burner, moved the pan to the sink. He cracked 3 eggs into a clean pan one-handed, scrambled them in 2 minutes, slid them onto a plate, set it in front of her and walked out. She ate the eggs. They were perfect. She wanted to cry and didn't entirely understand why. The shift was slow enough that neither of them noticed. She stopped staying in her room all day. She sat on the back porch with Beau in the afternoons. Warren would come home and walk past without speaking, but he'd leave the back door open behind him. She was learning his sounds. The weight of his footsteps meant he was thinking. The way he opened the fridge, fast, no browsing, meant bad mood. The silence after a phone call meant someone had said something he didn't like. He was learning hers too. The humming meant Beau was fussy. Quiet meant Beau was asleep and she was reading. She'd found books in his study and was working through them. Her footsteps at 2 in the morning meant she was exhausted and trying not to show it. Beau got sick on a Tuesday night. Fever of 101.2. Jolie was pacing the upstairs hallway at 2 in the morning, Beau screaming against her shoulder, tears running down her own face, when Warren's door opened. "What's wrong with him?" he said. "He has a fever. He's burning up. Please, I need a doctor." "What's the temperature?" 101.2. "That's not an emergency. Hold him upright, keep his clothes light, give him acetaminophen in small doses. He needs fluids and he needs you to calm down because he can feel everything you're feeling right now." "How do you know he's fine?" "Because I raised 2 boys and they both ran fevers every month for the first year." He said it flatly. No comfort. Just information delivered like a verdict. He went back into his room and closed the door. 20 minutes later, a paper bag was sitting outside his door. Infant acetaminophen. A digital thermometer still in the package. A clean cotton blanket. Jolie gave Beau the medicine and held him upright the way Warren said. The fever broke by morning. She kept that cotton blanket folded next to the yellow one. Neither of them ever mentioned it. 3 days later, she was washing bottles in the kitchen when she heard Warren on the phone in the study. He was laughing. Actually laughing, warm and loose, a sound she had never heard from him. It changed his voice completely. He sounded capable of joy. Something tightened in her chest. She stood there holding a bottle brush and realized this man had an entire life she knew nothing about. People who made him laugh, people he was easy with. A version of himself she would probably never see. She was a trespasser he was managing. She was a problem in his spare bedroom. She went upstairs with Beau and stayed there the rest of the evening. When Warren came out later, her light was off. He stood at the bottom of the stairs listening to nothing for a moment, then went back to his study. He didn't know why the silence bothered him. He chose not to examine it. The call had been his sister, Margaret, from Savannah. She'd called to warn him that his older son Hollis was asking around about the estate house. At 22, Hollis had inherited his grandfather's ambition without any of the patience that made it useful. Warren's younger son Tyner, 19, was quieter. He had his mother's habit of watching, waiting, and filing things away. Warren hung up and sat in the dark thinking about what would happen if either son found Jolie. Hollis would assume the worst and broadcast it. Tyner would assume the worst and weaponize it. Hollis came on a Saturday. Warren was in town handling a land dispute. Jolie was on the back porch with Beau on the yellow blanket when she heard a car door slam at the front. She gathered Beau and stood, heart hammering, because no one ever came to this house. That was the first thing she had learned about this place. The man who walked around the side of the house was young, early 20s, blonde, wearing a polo and khakis like he was coming from brunch. He had Warren's jaw but none of his stillness. He moved like every room was already his. "Who the hell are you?" he said. I'm staying here." "Are you?" "I'm Hollis Garner. This is my father's property." "I'll ask again. Who are you and why are you here with a baby?" He looked at Beau. Looked at her. Did the math and came up with the wrong answer entirely. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," he said. Half disgust, half delight. The delight of someone who had just found leverage. "How old are you?" 20? "And that's his kid." "No, it's not," That's not what this is. Save it. He pulled out his phone and started walking back toward his car, already dialing. Warren found out 2 hours later. Not from Jolie, from Margaret. Hollis had already told 3 people their father was keeping a young woman and baby at the estate house. Warren's lieutenant, Parnell, called to ask if there was something Warren needed to share. The question was polite. The implication was not. Warren walked into the house and found Jolie on the kitchen floor with Beau in her lap, tears on her face. She started talking the moment she saw him, the words piling over each other. He just showed up, I didn't tell him anything, I'm sorry, he just saw me and assumed. Stop, Warren said. She stopped. The word landed like a hand on a table. He stood in the kitchen looking down at her the same way he had that first day on the lawn. Same angle, same distance, same calculation in his eyes. Except now there were weeks behind it. Weeks of coffee on the counter and humming through the floor and a baby's cry at 2 in the morning that had become as familiar as the sound of his own front door. My son thinks that baby is mine, he said. He's told people who matter. People I've spent years managing. And now I have a problem that didn't exist 6 hours ago because you were sitting on my porch when he walked up. I'll tell him the truth. I'll talk to him and explain what really. You won't talk to anyone. You won't explain anything to anyone. You've done enough. That landed. She flinched like he'd hit her. Beau whimpered against her chest, picking up her heartbeat, her tension, the way her whole body went rigid under the weight of his voice. Warren watched her flinch and something in him recoiled. He recognized it. He'd seen that exact flinch on his ex-wife's face 100 times during their marriage. He'd told himself back then that control and cruelty were different things, that he was nothing like his father. But the flinch looked the same no matter what name you gave it. He turned away, walked to the window, leaned on the counter and stared at the back lawn where she'd been sleeping the day he found her. You don't get to stay, he said. Quiet. Final. Jolie wiped her face. She stood up slowly, Beau against her shoulder. She went upstairs. He heard the dresser drawer open and close. Heard the yellow blanket being folded. She came down with Beau in one arm and the blanket tucked under the other. Everything she owned in the world. She walked to the front door and opened it and stepped outside into the evening air. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked. Warren stood in the kitchen listening to her footsteps on the gravel. Each one was a small, specific sound getting farther away. Beau was quiet. The house was quiet. The coffee mug from that morning was still on the counter, half full and cold. The cotton blanket he'd left outside her door the night Beau was sick was folded neatly on the chair where she'd been sitting. She'd left it behind. She'd taken the yellow one, the one that was hers before any of this, and left the one he'd given her. He stood there looking at that folded blanket on the chair for a long time. The gravel sounds had stopped. She was past the gate by now or close to it, walking toward the road with a baby and a threadbare blanket and nothing else. He didn't move. She kept walking. She made it to the end of the gravel drive before the headlights caught her. The truck pulled up slow and stopped about 10 feet behind her. She didn't turn around. She kept walking with Beau pressed to her chest and the yellow blanket dragging against the dirt because her arm was tired. Warren got out and left the engine running. He walked until he was close enough that she could hear his boots on the gravel. Where exactly are you planning to go? He said. She kept walking. Jolie. It's 9 at night. You're on a back road with no streetlights and a 3-month-old baby. She stopped then. She turned around and her face was a mess, eyes swollen, chin trembling. Beau was awake, blinking at the headlights with that calm, confused look babies get when they don't understand what's happening around them. Anywhere that isn't your house, she said. Her voice was shaking but the words were clear. I'd rather sleep on the ground again than sit in that kitchen and watch you decide what to do with me like I'm a piece of land you're figuring out whether to sell. Warren stood there with his hands at his sides. The truck engine was idling behind him. Crickets were loud in the trees. He looked at her standing in the dark holding that baby and that blanket and he didn't say anything for a long time. I shouldn't have said what I said, he told her. The words came out stiff like they cost him something physical. About you doing enough. That wasn't fair. No, it wasn't. Come back inside. Give me a reason. He almost said something and then stopped. He looked away from her, toward the tree line, and rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. When he looked at her again something in his expression had shifted. The calculation was still there but it was sitting next to something else. Something tired and honest. Because that baby needs a roof tonight, he said. And because I left the back door open. It wasn't an apology. But Jolie had spent her whole life reading the distance between what people said and what they meant. She stood on that dark road for another 10 seconds. Then she walked back to the truck and climbed into the passenger seat and held Beau against her shoulder. Warren turned the truck around and drove them both back to the house. Neither of them spoke. Beau fell asleep before they reached the front door. The days after that were different. The silence had changed texture. She stopped making coffee in the mornings. He noticed on the first day and said nothing. By the third day the absence was like a missing note in a melody he'd gotten used to hearing. She kept to her room more. He heard Beau through the ceiling, but the humming had stopped. That was the part that got to him. The house had been quiet before she came and it was quiet now, but the two silences were nothing alike. Warren worked longer hours. He was managing the fallout from Hollis, making calls, reassuring Parnell, having conversations where every word was a chess move. His younger son Tyner called once, asking careful questions about the estate property. Warren shut him down fast, but he could hear the gears turning. Tyner was patient. That was what made him dangerous. On the 5th day after she came back, Warren had to move Jolie temporarily. The estate was compromised now that Hollis knew about it, and he needed to do some work at a secondary property, a larger house closer to town where he occasionally met with business associates. He told Jolie to bring Beau and get in the truck, and she did without asking questions. The secondary property was everything the estate wasn't. Polished floors, leather furniture, a kitchen with copper pots hanging above an island. There were people there, 2 men Warren spoke to in low voices, a woman who managed the house, and another woman who arrived around noon in a black dress and heels and immediately put her hand on Warren's arm like it belonged there. Her name was Regina. She was a friend of Warren's ex-wife who had become something else after the divorce. Something that involved standing close to him and touching his sleeve when she talked. Jolie sat in a side room with Beau on her lap and watched through the doorway as Regina leaned toward Warren and said something near his ear. Jolie looked down at Beau and adjusted his blanket and told herself the tightness in her stomach was hunger. But then something happened that she almost missed. Warren glanced toward the doorway where she was sitting. Just a quick look, barely a second. And then he stepped back from Regina. Moved to the other side of the counter, picked up a glass, started a new conversation with one of the men. The distance he put between himself and Regina was deliberate. Jolie saw it. She felt something warm move through her chest and she was afraid to name it. They drove back to the estate that evening. Neither of them mentioned Regina. The silence in the truck was full. 2 days later, one of Warren's younger associates came by the estate to drop off documents. His name was Dale. He was maybe 27, easygoing, with the kind of open face that made people comfortable immediately. He found Jolie on the back porch with Beau and he stopped to talk. He asked about the baby. He said Beau had good eyes. He made a joke about how babies always look like they're judging you, and Jolie laughed. A real laugh, sudden and bright, the first one in that house. Dale grinned and said it was nice to see someone smiling around here for once. Warren was watching from the study window. He didn't come outside. He stood behind the glass with his arms crossed and watched Dale lean against the porch railing and watched Jolie tilt her head back when she laughed. His jaw was tight. His hand was gripping his own forearm hard enough to leave marks. That evening, Dale called about a contract detail and Warren was short with him on the phone. Clipped answers, no small talk, ended the call in under a minute. Dale hung up confused, wondering what he'd done wrong. Warren poured a bourbon and drank it standing at the kitchen counter and didn't go near the porch for the rest of the night. Jolie didn't know any of this happened. The audience did. It was a Thursday night when the porch conversation happened. Beau was asleep upstairs. The monitor was on the kitchen table, its small green light blinking. Jolie was sitting on the back steps looking at the lawn, the same patch of grass where she'd been sleeping the day Warren found her. The yellow blanket was folded next to her. Warren came out. He didn't sit down at first. He stood near the door with his hands in his pockets like he was still deciding whether to stay. Then he sat on the top step about 2 feet away from her, and looked at the same patch of grass. They sat like that for a while. The air smelled like pine and warm dirt. "I grew up in foster care from age 6, Jolie said. She wasn't looking at him. 7 placements in 12 years. Some were fine. Some weren't. The yellow blanket is from the second one. The family gave it to me my first night and I kept it every time I moved because it was the only thing that was always mine." Warren was listening. Actually listening, with his whole body turned slightly toward her. "My marriage ended because I didn't know how to be in a room with someone without controlling it," he said. His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I managed my wife the way I manage everything. She told me once that living with me was like living in a house where someone else decides when the lights go on and off." Jolie looked at him. He was staring at the tree line. "You're present now," she said. "Here. You're present." He turned his head and looked at her. The distance between them on that step was about 2 feet. The porch light was off. The only light was coming from the kitchen window behind them. She could see his face but not clearly, just shapes and shadows and the line of his jaw. He didn't respond. But he didn't leave. They sat there for a long time and the silence between them was the warmest thing in that house. 4 days later, morning in the kitchen. She had started making coffee again, quietly without announcement. Warren came downstairs and reached for the mug at the same moment she was sliding it toward him. His hand landed on top of hers. They both went still. Her fingers were warm from the mug. His were dry and rough. Neither of them moved. She looked up at him and he looked down at her and the gap between them was maybe 6 inches. She could see the pulse in his throat. She could see the slight clench of his jaw, the way his eyes moved from hers to her mouth and back. He pulled away first, picked up the mug, said something about the weather, walked into the study. She stood at the counter and her hand was trembling and she pressed it flat against the surface to make it stop. Hollis came back on a Sunday. Warren was in town again. Jolie was beginning to understand that Hollis timed his visits that way. This time he brought 2 men with him. Older, heavy, the kind who let their size do the talking. Hollis walked onto the porch where Jolie was sitting with Beau and stood over her the way his father had that first day on the lawn. "I'm going to make this simple for you," Hollis said. "Whatever you think is happening here, it's not. My father collects problems and he'll throw you away when he's done. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to pack up your kid and your little blanket and walk out of here and never come back." Jolie's heart was slamming. She could feel Beau tense against her. The 2 men behind Hollis were watching with flat expressions. She was 20 years old and terrified and every instinct from foster care was telling her to go quiet, go small, wait for it to pass. But something had shifted in her over these weeks. Something that had to do with coffee on a counter and a cotton blanket outside a door and a man who sat next to her on a porch step and told her the truth about himself without being asked. "I'm not leaving because you told me to," she said. Her voice was shaking but she said every word. "That's not how this works anymore." Hollis stared at her. He hadn't expected resistance. He'd expected tears and compliance, the way he expected them from everyone who was smaller than him. He took a step closer and Jolie held Beau tighter and didn't look away. Hollis left. But the threat hung in the air like smoke. Warren found out that same evening. Jolie told him everything, Hollis's words, the 2 men, what she'd said back. Warren's face didn't change while she talked. His body was very still. When she finished, he said nothing. He picked up the phone and made 1 call. The next morning, Hollis and Tyner were both at the estate. Warren had summoned them. Jolie was in the kitchen with Beau when they arrived and Warren didn't tell her to leave. He let her stay. That was the first signal. He stood in the living room with both his sons and looked at Hollis and spoke in a voice Jolie had never heard from him. Low and even and absolutely final. "This is my house," Warren said. "She's in my house. If you come near her again, you are not my son having a disagreement with his father. You are a man who threatened a woman holding a baby in my home. And I deal with men like that in a very specific way." Hollis opened his mouth and Warren held up 1 hand and Hollis closed it. Warren turned to Tyner. "That goes for you too. Whatever you're calculating, stop." They left within 10 minutes. Warren stood in the living room with his back to the kitchen and Jolie could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the back of a chair. He had drawn a line through his own family for her. That evening Jolie found him in the study. He was sitting at his desk staring at nothing. She walked in and set the yellow blanket on the desk in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at her. "I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go," she said. "I have the road. I have the shelter. I have the same options I had the day I climbed your fence. I'm staying because I don't want to leave." Warren looked at the blanket on his desk. The same faded yellow blanket she'd been lying on the first time he saw her. He reached out and touched the edge of it with his fingers, running his thumb along the frayed hem. "Okay," he said. "Just that." But the way he said it, quiet, rough, like the word had to travel a long distance to reach his mouth, was enough. On a warm evening 2 weeks later, Jolie spread the yellow blanket on the back lawn. The same spot. The same grass. She laid Beau down on it and he kicked his legs at the sky and made the babbling sounds he'd started making that week. She sat next to him with her knees pulled up and her chin resting on her arms. Warren came out the back door. He stood on the porch for a moment, looking at her on the blanket in the grass. The same image from that first day. The same woman, the same baby, the same faded yellow fabric on his lawn. But everything else was different. He walked across the grass and sat down next to her. Beau saw him and reached up with both hands. Warren let the baby take hold of his finger and Beau gripped it tight with his whole fist. Jolie leaned her head against Warren's shoulder. The first time she had ever touched him on purpose. He was still for a moment. Then his shoulder relaxed beneath her and he tilted his head until it was resting against the top of hers. Beau was holding Warren's finger. Jolie was leaning into him. The yellow blanket was spread beneath all three of them on the same grass where this whole thing started. She got to stay.
If you enjoy these stories, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It really helps more than you might think.